I was monitoring a channel I had no business monitoring. That's the part they'll ask about later, when the inquiry board convenes and somebody in a pressed uniform wants me to explain myself. I'll tell them the truth. I was off duty, parked at Resupply Depot Calier 7, waiting on a drive coil the quartermaster promised would arrive in 9 hours. And I was bored. So I opened the broad-spectrum scanner on my personal console and started listening to bands I wasn't cleared to access. Not to anything specific, just listening. The regulations on broad-spectrum monitoring from a Terran vessel are unambiguous. Operational personnel may access allied and unclassified frequency bands during active patrol. Off-duty personnel at a resupply depot may not. The reasoning, I'm told, is signal contamination. If a Terran Corvette's transponder pings on a band it shouldn't be on, somebody 3 sectors away logs an anomaly and files a report, and then somebody else has to read that report, and the whole chain becomes everyone's problem. I understand the reasoning. I opened the scanner anyway. The distress beam came in at 0314 local, and it was not addressed to me. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the thing I owe the inquiry board, and the thing I owe Captain Sorvin, and the 2 debts pull in different directions. The routing header was clean. Vothrani Compact Emergency Band, Priority Tier 1, Sector-Specific Relay Chain, aimed at the Compact's second standing fleet. The beam identified the sender as the Pelennor, a Vothrani light cruiser. Registry number intact, damage report embedded in the carrier signal. Hull breach on decks 4 through 6, starboard side, drive offline. Life support on reserve cells. 16 wounded, including the commanding officer. Request, tug and medical. Any available compact vessel, respond on this frequency. It was not aimed at Earth. It was not aimed at any human vessel. It was not routed through Terran-monitored space. I heard it only because I had the broad-spectrum scanner open on a band I was not supposed to be using. I sat with it for 4 minutes. 4 minutes is a long time when you're reading a damage report that mentions reserve cells. I checked the Compact's fleet deployment register. It's publicly readable if you know where to look. And I spent 2 years on a joint operations desk, so I know where to look. The second standing fleet was logged at a combined arms exercise near the outer veil, 3 sectors out. Estimated response time to the Pellennor's coordinates, 11 hours, assuming they detached a tug immediately. 11 hours is a long time when life support is on reserve cells. My Corvette, the Danner, had a crew of 23, 1 medical officer, a portable hull seal kit rated for small-gauge Terran punctures, enough armament to discourage precisely nothing. We were not a rescue ship, not a tug, not a hospital transport, and we had no standing orders, no patrol route, and no authorization to cross into non-allied space. We were a Corvette at a depot, waiting for a drive coil. I filed a course amendment at 0322. I logged it under Supply Transit Code Bravo 7, which is the classification for unscheduled depot-to-depot material transfers. It is not the classification for unauthorized humanitarian detours into non-allied space in response to a distress beam you intercepted on a channel you weren't cleared to access. But Bravo 7 doesn't trigger an automatic review for 9 days, and 9 days was long enough for the paperwork to become someone else's problem. The Danner cleared the depot's navigation lane at 0331 and turned toward the Pellennor's last known coordinates. I told the crew we'd picked up an errand. Chief Warrant Officer Harsa, who has served with me for 4 years and knows what my errands look like, said nothing and adjusted the drive output. We arrived in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The Pelennor was listing 9 degrees to port when we dropped out of transit. I could see the hull breach from the viewport, decks 4 through 6, starboard quarter, hull plating peeled outward in a way that said micro debris field, not weapons fire, no scorch marks, no aggression, just a ship that had hit something it didn't see, in a corridor nobody was watching, and sent its call to the people it expected to answer. I hailed them on the Compact's standard greeting frequency, because using the Terran hailing band would have required them to retune their already damaged comms array, and that seemed like poor manners. Vothrani vessel Pelennor, this is the Terran Corvette Danner. We received your distress beam, standing by to assist. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I counted. Then a voice came back, measured, careful, frayed at the edges, in a way that told me the speaker was injured and preferred that I didn't notice. I learned later this was Captain Sorvin, the Pellennor's commanding officer. Fractured collarbone, console burn across his left shoulder, seated in a command chair that no longer swiveled because the deck plating underneath had buckled 2 centimeters upward. "Terran vessel," he said. "We did not transmit on your frequency." "I know," I said. "I heard it on yours." A shorter silence. 5 seconds. "You are not on our relay chain." "No." The beam was addressed to the compact's second fleet. "I'm aware." I could hear low voices in the background on his end. Quick, clipped Vothrani syllables my translator parsed only in fragments. Someone was reading the Danner's transponder data aloud. Someone else repeated the word for Earth, twice, in a tone I'd describe as professionally bewildered. Captain Sorvin came back on the channel. His voice had changed. Not warmer, not colder, but flatter. The voice of a man recalculating a thing he had assumed was fixed. "Your vessel is a Corvette." "It is." "Medical capability?" "One officer, field grade, she's good." "Hull repair?" "Portable seal kit, rated for Terran alloy, not yours, but my engineer says he can make it work with bonding adhesive. It won't hold forever. It'll hold long enough for your tug to arrive." "Our tug is 11 hours out." "Then it will hold for 11 hours. He was quiet again. Behind him, the hum of emergency lighting, the thin wheeze of a ventilation system running on backup. Then he said, "The thing I've turned over since. You broke your own protocol to come here." It wasn't a question. He'd read the Danner's transponder. A Terran Corvette registered at a resupply depot, flagged off duty. No patrol orders, no operational mandate, and no business whatsoever on a compact emergency band. He'd done the arithmetic. An off-duty Corvette officer at a depot does not hear a Vothrani Priority 1 beam unless that officer is listening to channels she isn't supposed to touch. And she does not arrive in 2 hours and 40 minutes unless she filed a fraudulent course amendment and burned fuel she'll need to explain. He knew. He'd worked it out in the time it took his translator to parse our transponder data, and he was looking at the same conclusion I'd reached an hour into the burn. This ship should not be here. "Probably," I said. "My quartermaster would use a stronger word. I don't know if the Vothrani have a physiological equivalent of a dry laugh." Something in his breathing shifted. "We worked for 6 hours. Lieutenant Paschel, my medical officer, went across on a pressure tether and treated 9 of the 16 wounded before the Pelinor's own medics stabilized the rest. She set one Vothrani officer's arm using a splint designed for a human femur, which required creative adaptation and a degree of cheerful profanity that transcended the language barrier. The Hull SEAL team, 4 of my crew, none trained on Vothrani ship architecture, patched the breach on Deck 5 using bonding adhesive, structural clamps meant for a different alloy gauge, and 3 rolls of adaptive seal tape we were supposed to be saving for our own maintenance cycle. Sorven's chief engineer inspected the patch afterward and called it structurally implausible but airtight. I took that as high praise. By hour 4, the Pelinor's life support was back on primary power. By hour 5, the list had corrected to 2 degrees. By hour 6, the compact's tug, dispatched late from the exercise, running hot, appeared on long-range sensors, 3 hours out and closing. Captain Sorvin hailed me one final time before we disconnected the tethers. "The compact's operations command will want to know how a Terran Corvette arrived before our own fleet." "I imagine they will." "What will you tell your superiors?" "That I filed a supply transit amendment, and it took me somewhere unexpected." "That is not what happened." "No," I said, "but it's what the code says, and in my experience, people tend to read the code before they read the explanation." A brief silence. Then, "Lieutenant Commander, the beam was not meant for you." "I know. You answered it." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about giving him something measured, something about shared obligation, or the duty of proximity, or the procedural case for humanitarian override in non-allied space. But Sorvin struck me as a man who'd spent his career around people who talked like that, and who preferred the version without the scaffolding. "Because I heard it," I said, "and I was close enough." The Danner broke orbit at 0947 and returned to Callier 7 at standard cruise. The drive coil was waiting. I filed the after-action report under the same Bravo 7 code and attached the Pelinor's damage assessment as a supplemental appendix. The inquiry board convened 11 days later. I received a formal reprimand for unauthorized channel access, unauthorized course deviation, and unauthorized expenditure of medical supplies in non-allied space. 3 violations. The reprimand is on my record. So is the compact's note, which arrived through diplomatic channels 6 weeks later. It is one line: Terran Corvette Danner, received and noted with appreciation. I keep both documents in the same drawer.